Hey everyone, Spum Donor here to talk to you about Fixed. It's great. I loved it. Go watch it immediately. Genndy Tartakovsky is the most important working auteur in American animation. What can you say? It's difficult to even describe why this movie is so good without also talking about how rare it is for an animated movie like this to get made in the first place and to get released, at least in Hollywood. So I'd like to take this opportunity with this review to go into some of those aspects of how Fixed fits in, or rather doesn't fit into, the modern animation industry. First of all, obviously, Fixed is not a CG animated movie. It's rare to see a fully hand-drawn animated movie in America these days. I prefer to say hand-drawn animation and not 2D because I feel like that's a term that people just took from video games. We don't call CG animation 3D animation, so why does it make sense to say 2D animation? Some people say traditional animation, but I think that makes it sound like it belongs in a museum. Anyway, whatever you call it, that makes Fixed something of an event film for those of us who miss hand-drawn animated features and wish that Hollywood hadn't decided they were obsolete by the end of the 2000s. Second of all, this is a Cartoonist's film. You might think that all animated films are Cartoonist's films, but let me explain. Genndy Tartakovsky, the director and co-writer, he is an animator and a cartoonist, and this movie was his idea. I don't think the average person knows that the average animated film is neither conceived by nor written by cartoonists or animators. On TV, they sometimes are, but when it comes to movies, even at Disney and Pixar, most, if not all of their movies now are conceived of and written by people who are not visual artists themselves. The typical process for an animated feature getting made in Hollywood is a producer has an idea for an animated movie. They attach some big-name stars to do the voices. They hire screenwriters to develop it around the stars. And then the animators and artists are kind of brought in afterwards, like technicians, to just put it all together. They're functionaries with limited creative input. The average animated movie is pretty much a star vehicle for whatever famous live-action actors the producers hired to voice the characters. Now, I can already hear some of you in the comments saying, movies have to come from screenplays. That's how movies get made, and those writers don't have to know how to draw to tell a story. Well, I'm not going to do my full diatribe on that, but just for now, think of it this way. I'm sure you've read comics or manga that were written and drawn by the same person, so obviously people who can draw are capable of telling stories and coming up with good dialogue. In Hollywood, though, screenwriting is a very proprietary profession, and producers do not usually give that level of creative authority to the artists in the animation industry. Fixed, on the other hand, this is the work of a real animation auteur. Genndy Tartakovsky got to approach this not as a hired hand, but as an animator who was making the animated film that he wanted to make. And that really gives you a completely different kind of animated film, because he approached this from an animator's perspective. The animation isn't just a means to an end for him, like you see with a lot of animated shows or films. He's a real artist who cares about the art form. And that would be a good thing even if he were just making a children's film. He actually did write and direct the third Hotel Transylvania movie, but this is also an adult comedy, so it's not every day you get to see an animated film where a cartoonist is really trying to make you laugh with more graphic or explicit adult humor. If some other YouTuber wanted to do this, I'm just putting the idea out there, I think it would be a worthwhile comparison to contrast Fixed with Sausage Party, which was a CG animated, R-rated adult comedy, but as is typical for a Hollywood animated feature, it was not conceived of by a cartoonist, it was not written by cartoonists, and yeah, it's largely a showcase for a bunch of famous live-action actors who they hired for the voices. Fixed and Sausage Party are two very different movies, even though I'm sure Sausage Party is what a lot of people have been comparing it to. And on that note, the third factor, which in combination with being a hand-drawn animated film and being a cartoonist-driven film, the third factor, which makes this a really unique viewing experience, is that, yeah, this was made for an adult audience, and that's a rare thing in any form of Hollywood animation, or at least feature animation, because we do have a lot of TV animation that's ostensibly for adults, but animated feature films that court any kind of exclusively adult audience, those have always been so rare that they're virtually non-existent. And I say that adult animation on TV is ostensibly for adults because Americans have always had kind of a troubled relationship with the idea of cartoons for adults, whether in animation or in comics. I'll keep my comments relegated to animation here, but to put it briefly, unlike the Japanese animation industry, Americans have never fully accepted the premise that animation can be for adults as well as kids. Adult animation in America tends to be, and I use this term apolitically, it tends to be reactionary. It's reactionary to the hegemony of Disney in America, specifically because they dominated the market forever with films that were meant to be seen by the whole family, and little kids and moms in particular. I talk about this a bit in my series on Disney that I've been making, but long story short, the Japanese did not see it that way, and eventually, once anime reached the American market, it was only a matter of time before that became the most popular animation in America amongst adults. Because, with very few exceptions, Hollywood has never been interested in that market, and they've never committed to the possibility of it. It took Genndy Tartakovsky 16 years to get this movie made and released, apparently. How much anime for adults have Americans watched in that time? And apparently Netflix passed on this the first time around, too. Passed on releasing it, I mean. It was already done, because I guess it didn't fit the mainstream conception of what adult animation is. There's a Deadline Hollywood article that came out this week, which I'll link to in the description because it's worth reading, but Genndy said in that article, in regards to finding a distributor, quote, "Rated R, hand-drawn, original, those are not all positive things for an animated film," end quote. Note that he said hand-drawn too, and not 2D. Anyways, the two main conceptions of adult animation in Hollywood are cartoon sitcoms, all made in the wake of The Simpsons, and then over on Adult Swim, you have what you might call stoner cartoons. And I'm now going to quote from 4chan because a 4chan anon put it really well back in 2020, quote, "The reason stoner humor or edgy family sitcom is the only other form of American animation is because the people that really enjoy that stuff think it's funnier because it's coming out of something that's normally meant for children." End quote. And to that, I would add, Americans also tend to think adult animation is funnier when it's badly drawn. That's a very reactionary, ignorant response to Disney hegemony. Like, oh, cartoons are supposed to be cute, like in Disney movies, so adult cartoons should be ugly. And often it's not even so much that they're drawn ugly, it's more like they're drawn crudely. Ugly is a misleading word because if you've seen stuff like Ren and Stimpy, you know that ugly stuff can actually be drawn really skillfully and beautifully. That's different from something that's drawn in a deliberately amateurish or deliberately unappealing way, like Big Mouth. But adult animation, as typically produced by Hollywood, it's either that, or if the art style isn't deliberately unpleasant to look at, then it's just really bland and boring looking. Family Guy has been the model for countless cartoon sitcoms aimed at adults over the past 25 years, and that's very perfunctory animation that tries to draw as little attention to itself as possible. You don't even have to look at the screen with shows that are designed like that because you're pretty much just listening to the voice actors talking. And this is all by design, by the way, for the same reason that animated movies aren't usually made with the animation first in mind. Adult cartoon sitcoms, and even most stoner cartoons, for lack of a better term, those types of shows are conceived of and run by comedy writers who literally don't want the animation to overshadow what they think should be the real focus of their shows, the dialogue and the voice acting. And when those shows do their sex and violence humor, they get away with it because the drawings are usually so bland and so boring it doesn't matter. It's only supposed to elicit a dull chuckle. That's the other practical reason why adult animation on American TV looks so amateurish, because if the adult content were drawn well, people actually might be engaged with what they're seeing and they might get offended by that stuff. They wouldn't be able to just switch their brains off. I can go on and on about this stuff, but this is all just to say that, yeah, Fixed is an adult cartoon feature built from the ground up by an animator, and it's good. None of what I've been saying would mean anything if it wasn't good, but Genndy did it. He made an adult animated feature of his own creation, and it's good. This is a remarkable achievement. And yeah, I'm saying this about a movie where two gay dogs blow each other. I know a lot of people thought that him doing something like this was beneath him. You know, Genndy Tartakovsky, the great Genndy Tartakovsky, is doing some vulgar, gross-out comedy because for over 3 decades now, he's had this illustrious, kind of quietly unprecedented career. He started with Dexter's Laboratory, and then came Samurai Jack and the Clone Wars, Hotel Transylvania, which became a franchise, Primal, all this really beloved and respected stuff. So a lot of people thought it was beneath him to want to do a raunchy adult comedy. But the guy is nothing if not prolific, so I wasn't that surprised when he announced he'd be making an R-rated comedy. I thought that's an ambitious thing to want to do if you're an animation director with a strong artistic voice. If anybody can do it and do it well, it's him. He's done great stuff for kids, great stuff for adolescents and teenagers, and he's not done challenging himself. So I was really excited to see what he would do, and he didn't disappoint. I think this is as big of a career triumph for him as anything, and that might sound silly to say about a comedy about a dog who's going to lose his balls, but it's masterfully directed and animated. He put everything into it that he's learned over the course of 3 decades in the business. And I can't squeeze a whole Genndy Tartakovsky career retrospective into this review, but he has always had a filmmaker's sense of visual storytelling. Even his 7-minute Dexter's Laboratory cartoons were cinematic. Like, go back and watch the pilot episode, or watch Dexter's Rival, or even watch The Big Cheese. He studied his Looney Tunes when it came to telling a whole story arc in just 7 minutes. He really learned how to tell a story and trim it down to its essentials. There's no fat, there's no filler in what he does. And by the way, even with all of his career successes, even with his proven track record, he still had to fight to get this movie made. He's probably the only director in the industry who even had the clout it took to get a hand-drawn, feature-length, adult animated comedy made and released that was all based on his own original idea. And he still had to sneak it past the system to some degree. He did a great interview. I strongly recommend listening to this. I'll link it in the description. He did a great interview a couple years ago with Joe Dante and Josh Olson on their podcast, The Movies That Made Me, where he talked about some of his favorite movies, but he also talked a lot about his career and his struggles with the industry and his difficulties in getting Fixed made. And one thing he had to do to convince executives to fund this movie was give them a script that had about twice as much dialogue as he actually wanted, because he knew that animation executives were more comfortable with dialogue-heavy humor in an animation script. He said something like, when executives are reading a script for an animated movie, they want to read a lot of funny dialogue. They don't want to have to visualize how funny the drawings are going to be. he knew they weren't going to sign off on Fixed if they knew this was going to be a more visually oriented animated movie. An animation-oriented animated movie. What a concept, right? So, Genndy Tartakovsky has done a great thing for the industry in getting a movie like this made and making it as good as it is. He's helped push the industry forward against its will, basically, because now cartoonists and animators can point to this movie and say, look, you can make a feature-length adult cartoon that succeeds on the strength of its cartooniness within the context of raunchy adult humor. And what we get from that, which is such a rare thing in so-called adult animation in Hollywood, is we get an animated comedy where the basis of the comedy is the animation itself. It's in the character acting. It's in how you see the characters emote. It's in the performances, like any good comedy, in a way that's not just limited to how the voice actors are reading their lines, or even what the lines in the script are particularly. I mean, don't get me wrong, the dialogue is funny. I noticed Genndy's co-writer was John Vitti, who was one of the classic Simpsons guys, so there's no complaints there. But what makes the movie so successful as a comedy is how the expressions and reactions of the animated characters are drawn, and how they move, and how those things are timed. And they're not making the same stock cartoon character expressions that you see in every animated movie. There's a real specificity to them. Often a character is feeling more than one emotion at a time. And the way that's drawn, not just on their faces, but in their body language, there's subtlety and nuance to it, which, especially with dog characters, is a real feat of animation direction. And Genndy makes it all look easy. It all just flows naturally, and a lot of the funniest moments in the movie really catch you off guard, like they should. Again, it's so rare to see animation this good applied to scenes like there's one early on where some of the dogs are getting grossed out because another dog is chewing on a cat turd. And that's something where, like, if you saw that on South Park or American Dad, it would be like, fine, whatever, that's funny, I guess, But the way it plays out in Fixed, you're laughing at how the dogs are reacting to their friend, and you're laughing at the faces the dog is making as he's enjoying himself doing this disgusting thing. You're laughing at the drawings. I can't tell you how rare this is in modern animation. This is what the real illusion of life is. It's not about having the smoothest possible animation or the most realistic backgrounds, or the trickiest camera angles. It's about feeling like the characters you're watching are having some kind of inner life, and they are responding authentically to what's happening in the scene. It's about believing in the reality, not the realism of the animation, if that makes sense. Part of that, too, comes from the fact that Genndy's art style is not trying to imitate anyone else's or imitate some other studio. I'm sure a lot of reviewers are comparing the look of this film to Ren and Stimpy, and yeah, obviously you can see that influence because you can see Ren and Stimpy influence in almost everything if you look hard enough. And yes, there are Ren and Stimpy alumni in the credits, but as far as the overall look of the film, it's a really unique-looking art style. It's very well observed from the looks and behaviors of actual dogs, caricatured in a very funny way, which, depending on the needs of the scene, sometimes it's very stylized with what you might call flat-looking drawings, but then at other times, depending on the character and the action of the scene, they're drawn and animated in a more three-dimensional looking way. But it all blends seamlessly, and there are so many great drawings in this movie that go by so quickly throughout it that you want to rewatch it just to look at them all again. This is all so far removed from what the average person expects adult animation to be. I don't know what the average Netflix viewers are going to think of it. Hopefully they like it and they can see how different adult animation can be from like Archer or whatever, where the animation is just perfunctory, where it's just a delivery system for the voice actor's dialogue, and the animated characters are just mouthpieces for the writers. If their baseline expectation for adult animation looks and sounds like the typical Netflix writer cartoon, like Hoops or Chicago Party Ant, I mean, maybe something like Fixed is going to be too jarring for them and they're going to hate it. I guess we'll find out. But I like to be optimistic. Oh, and naturally, this movie was actually completed 2 years ago, but despite Genndy's track record of success, it's only coming out on streaming now instead of in theaters where it was intended to be. Unless some big name like Seth Rogen is attached to your animated feature for adults, that's the best distribution you can hope for, apparently. I think it's really a shame this film wasn't able to find a theatrical distributor because comedies are meant to be seen with crowds. You need that infectious sense of laughter that comes from being in an audience. And I remember there was a period of time where both this and The Day the Earth Blew Up, the Looney Tunes movie that came out earlier this year, they had both been announced. Neither of them had come out yet, but it was assumed that they would both get theatrical releases. And I was really excited because I thought, wow, a hand-drawn animated kids movie that isn't Disney and a hand-drawn animated movie for adults. If either of these is a hit in theaters, that could really shake up the industry. We might see more hand-drawn animated features. Well, Day the Earth Blew Up technically got a theatrical release, barely, and they botched it horribly. I talked about that in my review, which I'll link here, but sometime later when Fixed finally got a release date announced, and it was going to be a Netflix release, I mean, I was happy that it was coming out finally, but my heart sank a little bit too, because I thought, okay, that's it for hand-drawn animated features, let alone animated features for adults. We're just completely ceding that territory to anime forever, I guess. It's sad, this could have been another Fritz the Cat. It could have been a cultural phenomenon. I mean, new films can be popular on Netflix, but when something gets released as streaming content, it all just kind of levels out as streaming content. It was made as a movie, but now it feels more like a Netflix special. It just doesn't have as much ability to make a cultural impact as a theatrically released film does. Even if everybody sees it and it's a big hit by Netflix standards, I don't know that that's going to result in more animation for adults getting produced. But I might be wrong, and hopefully I am, because I would like it to still be able to have a positive effect on the industry that way. So, one last aspect I'd like to cover in the whole saga of this unlikely movie is that when screenshots and eventually the trailer for this film came around, I'd say that about half of animation fans online, the animation community, although we're talking mostly about fans, not professionals here, about half that crowd's initial response to Fixed was pretty negative. And it didn't have a good trailer, to be fair. Trailers are cut by the distributors, not by the filmmakers, so Netflix tried to make it look like Sausage Party. They even had the requisite screen at the end with all the famous people's names to get you excited, even though that was like Adam Devine and Idris Elba in this instance. Nothing about Genndy Tartakovsky, but anyways, the level of excitement from animation fandom about this movie was maybe less than you would think it would be. And when I say animation fandom or animation fans, I don't mean the average person who watches a few animated shows or movies here and there. I mean people who primarily watch animated shows and movies. And that's not even including anime necessarily, because anime fandom is still pretty much its own thing. I'm talking about people in their teens and 20s who've outgrown Disney movies and whatever TV cartoons they grew up on, but they haven't stopped watching them. And they usually have enough self-awareness about maybe being a little immature to say, no, actually, even though this stuff I'm into is made for kids, there's actually a lot in them for young adults too, and even not so young adults. And this is another topic I can't fully unpack in this review, but as far as Fixed goes, you'd think they'd be hyped for it, right? If they're always insisting that cartoons aren't just for kids. Well, you'd think, but because Fixed is a raunchy comedy, a gross-out comedy, whatever you want to call it, they were all ready to look down their noses at it because they're very self-conscious and insecure about still watching kids' cartoons, so they want adult animation, quote-unquote, to be something more respectable. They're constantly saying, animation is an art form, we need to treat animation like cinema, and I agree with those sentiments in of themselves, but this doesn't necessarily mean the average animation fan wants to see more animated equivalents of, like, European art films. No, what they want is for it to be socially acceptable to watch Disney movies as an adult and cry over them. They don't want cartoons that might make them feel uncomfortable by assuming too much of them in terms of being able to handle sex, violence, or other potentially offensive material. They have a very therapeutic relationship to animation. They take Pixar movies very seriously. In fact, the worst insult they can use to dismiss stuff like Fixed or Ren and Stimpy or Beavis and Butthead is that it's gross out or it's mean-spirited, as if there's no difference between those things and something like Big Mouth in terms of artistic merit. The even more screwed up part of this is that these animation fans, if they're like under 25, a lot of them have grown up consuming the most graphic cartoon pornography imaginable online. And then when the trailer for Fixed came out, suddenly they all need their fainting couches. It's like, I think they're the most extreme example of a wider societal problem where younger people are uncomfortable with anything sexual, so they just want all things sexual to be completely compartmentalized out of the culture and relegated exclusively to pornography, which is really immature and unhealthy, but that's a subject for another time, maybe. It is kind of ironic, actually, that I feel that Fixed is something very fresh and new, but it also feels like a little bit of a throwback because Hollywood hasn't been making R-rated raunchy comedies with any regularity for a long time now. It seems like the last major one was The Hangover, and those kinds of movies pretty much disappeared in the 2010s, like a lot of things. So, yeah, the only thing a young viewer might even have to compare it to, besides Ren and Stimpy, would be Sausage Party, which came out a decade ago, and Big Mouth, which I think started a decade ago. And Sausage Party, by the way, that came out in the 2010s. That was a big hit. So even when mainstream culture is at its most repressive, people will always yearn to laugh at bodily functions. And if a well-drawn, well-animated movie like Fixed can make them laugh just as much as any other R-rated comedy, then that's going to do a lot more to convince the average person that animation can be just as entertaining for adult audiences as for kids. That's going to do a lot more than any number of Oscar-winning Pixar movies. And by the way, as funny as the movie is, I did get invested in the story too. I cared about what was going to happen to the main character, because it turns out when you cut out all the standard emotional manipulation that you expect in an animated kids movie, and you just let a good director, a good storyteller tell his story, you can get to something real. Also, by the way, the movie's been out for a couple of days now, and I am happy to say that it does seem like at least some of those naysayers who were going, oh, I love Genndy Tartakovsky, but oh, the gross-out humor, the sexual humor, it makes me uncomfortable. They have come around to actually watching it, and a lot of them, it seems like they were won over. It just annoys me that any of them felt like they had to be won over. I mean, it's Genndy Tartakovsky. He made this because he loves animation. Nobody who knew that this was his project should have presumed that it was some cynical attempt at catering to the lowest common denominator. But a lot of animation fans and critics who should know better, they did jump to that conclusion before seeing it. In that same Deadline Hollywood article that I mentioned before, Genndy had another quote which I thought was worth sharing. He was speaking here in regards to adult animation. He said, "We have all these adult series, but features, it's pretty much this kind of Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, Marvel model. There are very few things that are different, and that's what's frustrating. We should be as different as live action, so you can have a horror animated film, R-rated comedy animated film, or a dramatic animated film. It should be open to that." End quote. And he's absolutely right. In a healthy animation industry, there should be multiple animated films coming out every year in a variety of genres. It's like one of animation fans' favorite platitudes is that animation is a medium. It's not a genre. It's a medium. But if you really believe that and you really want that, like, you got to start demanding better from the industry for that to happen, which also means demanding better of yourself, because a movie like Fixed, it's not for an audience that doesn't want to grow up. It's not for an audience that just wants the animation equivalent of YA novels or endless varieties of Disney-type movies. And it's not adult animation for neurotics who hate themselves like BoJack Horseman. It's adult animation for regular people, for normies, but I mean that in the best possible sense. Genndy's showing us the way. He's showing us the way. Thank you, Genndy. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if you liked the movie or if you hated it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, because my next upload is going to be the conclusion of my series on Disney, How Disney Stole Your Childhood. And I still have a lot left to say about how that studio infantilizes not just animation fans, but everybody. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening.